Welcome. I'm Dr. Jamie Mathias of the Austin ISD Board of Trustees and also Executive Director of MASBA, the Mexican American School Boards Association. As our friends from throughout the state begin to log on, I'd like to provide a brief overview of our time together today for this conversation co-sponsored by MASBA, Leadership ISD, and the Texas Caucus of Black School Board Members. In a moment, I'll introduce our MASBA president, who will in turn introduce today's speaker. Before that, I'd like to draw your attention to a few details concerning this GoToWebinar platform. If you'd like to raise your hand to be acknowledged to speak, simply press the raise hand button, which looks like a hand with an up arrow. I'll give you a moment to find the raise hand button. If you'd like to try it now, you can practice raising and lowering your hand. If you raise your hand, we ask you to lower your hand as well so that we'll know that you're not waiting to ask a question. If you can also type your questions in the questions tab. I'll give you a moment to find the questions tab on the right. We also encourage conversation through the chat tab. Take a moment to find the chat tab. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our MASBA president. He serves as the president of the Fort Worth ISD Board of Trustees, the 5th largest district here in the state of Texas. At the state level, he serves on the board of directors of the Texas Association of School Boards, and at the national level, he serves as chair of the Council of Urban Boards of Education. In his day job, he serves as chief of governance and leadership for Leadership ISD, one of the co-sponsors of this conversation series. Please join me in welcoming our MASBA president, Jacinto Ramos, Jr.
Thank you, Dr. Mathias. It's good to be with you all this morning, this afternoon, depending on what part of the state you're in. Thank you for joining us as we continue the conversation of what we called governance in crisis. And just a real brief overview. We started this a couple of weeks back through Leadership ISD, where we wanted to just simply create a space for board members and educational leaders and superintendents to be able to come together and just visit with one another about what was going on. Unprecedented times. Nobody really seemed to have had a complete grip on this, so we figured why not bring in the power of community to be able to share ideas. And then has come the collaboration with MASBA, as Dr. Mathias's great leadership, to be able to come in and partner to expand this. And then now we've gone even further. We've partnered with the Black Caucus of Texas, visited with President Ty Jones and their leadership. And so they are now partnering with us as we continue to just extend that olive branch of community to all of our friends out here in the state of Texas. We then last week had Dr. Drew Howard come on to visit with us from TEA and talk in regards of governance. And then to me, Dr. Phil Gore goes hand in hand with all of these conversations. Not only someone who is very knowledgeable in theory, but also from the practitioner level. He himself has been a board member. He worked with the National School Boards Association and is partly to blame for a lot of this material in this book that I reference pretty regularly. And I think that no better way than for us to be able to have a conversation, but even what's in the beginning of the book of balanced governance, of where he and Ellsbury described 3 types of boards. There's the disengaged board, there's the micromanaging board, and then there's the informed oversight board. And I think at this point in time, an I statement for me is when I saw this come in and seeing what was about to happen as far as like not being able to be in the same space together, to not be that micromanaging board member, to not get in the way of the superintendent and the leadership, to prohibit them from being able to do their job really, really well. But I also then started to struggle with not being a disengaged board member, not being completely hands off, and not finding that balance as what's described in the book. I thought that was the new territory and somewhat dangerous for myself as one trustee. So thought, why not just reach out to Dr. Phil Gore and have him visit with us, also with the Texas Association of School Boards. And so, Dr. Gore, we'd love to listen to you, love to hear what your thoughts and ideas are on this time that we're dealing with, and love to lean on your words of wisdom. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A to be able to visit with you and hear a little bit more of your perspective.
Thank you, Jacinto. It's wonderful to have you set the stage in that manner, where what we're talking about truly is all about balance. And yes, this is a crisis mode. and superintendents and their administrative teams have some very critical things that they need to accomplish, but the school board hand in hand also needs to be a part of that. And so you'll hear this concept of balance, no doubt, through many of my remarks, but also the idea that this is about boards and superintendents working together, working in collaborative ways that reduce confusion and promote a sense of calm whenever possible, and also a sense of confidence. With all of this uncertainty around COVID-19 and this novel coronavirus, we recognize that many school district communities, your constituents, your parents, your families, your students, your staff, they really are looking to the school district for leadership, leadership that provides a unified message. And so while everything is disrupted, meetings, events, normal routines are being disrupted all over the world, we are simply acting out on a local level our best judgment, our best governance, and doing all we can to bring out the best of ourselves, frankly. And that's what I would encourage all the trustees in Texas to do, is especially during this crisis time, bring your best self to the table. As things change in our district, I know we'll hear again from the governor this week about either possible extension of shelter-in-place orders or even possible relaxation of some of that, and what that looks like. It seems like school districts at the local level have a great opportunity to help ensure that the communication gets to all the corners of the district. And specifically, I think of non-English speaking families that may need translated messages, and also that obligation that districts have to maintain individualized instruction for students with disabilities, providing related medical services for your most vulnerable districts, most vulnerable students. That's really just the tip of the iceberg of what districts are facing right now across the state of Texas. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of disruption, but also we're seeing some beautiful examples of adaptation. And I know throughout this webinar, there's opportunities for folks to enter questions and comments in the chat. We really highly encourage you to do that so that as we go along, we can talk about specific concerns that may be shared among many, but might be too many details just to get into during this format. It's really important that board members know and not only stay within their role, but that they fulfill their entire role. And to do that, you have to stay connected. So in this time of social distancing, it's probably more vital that we stay connected by text, by email, by phone calls, by video conferences. There is a lot of technology available. I'm not talking about having illegal meetings or walking quorums or violating Open Meetings Act. I'm talking about checking in with your fellow board members. Hey, how are you doing? I was thinking about you. I saw that comment in social media that was not favorable toward you or toward your family. You know, I'm sorry for that. What can I do for you during this time? Very similarly, that type of relationship with the superintendent. Now, I do think it's important to let the superintendent lead. Let them feel empowered, let them be out front, help them be out front, while at the same time you recognize that your local community has elected you as their representative. So balance in perhaps the board president and superintendent having a webinar like this for your community or releasing a statement, the fact that we're all in this together. It's important that trustees know what the message is. Now, you may have a designated spokesperson, and we sure hope that you do, but it doesn't mean that others shouldn't also have and share individually, collectively, a very similar message. So staying connected with your superintendent and his or her staff so that you know what the message is, but also retaining oversight. So I'm really curious, Jamie's going to put up a poll question. I wonder how many of you have already conducted a virtual board meeting. Some meetings since the shelter-in-place orders began and the governor waived the requirements for being able to meet virtually. a little bit easier. So if you would please complete the poll that should be on your screen at this time. Have you had a virtual board meeting? Jamie, are you able to post? Okay, so 85% of the people on this call have had a virtual board meeting. And I'm very curious about those that have not or haven't yet. I'm assuming there are plans developing for that. There are a lot of resources on the TASB website, simply tasb.org. These are also communicated to you all in multiple ways. But toward the top of the website is the red banner that click here for coronavirus web resources. And there are a lot of details on how to conduct a virtual meeting. Also some tips on, things like basically make sure there's light in front of you and not so much light behind you so that you're not grayed out, that kind of thing. The next question we had was, if you've conducted a virtual board meeting, how did that go? So very curious, was it natural? Were you able to communicate well? And so if you would respond to this survey, that'll give us a good example or a good sample of how things are going with that, whether it went extremely well or, yeah, it was just okay, or it didn't work at all for some reason. And then once you've had a few seconds to respond to that, Jamie will display the results and we'll see how that's working for you. Wow, this is great. Way better than I expected. Not one person has commented that it didn't work at all, or it didn't work well at all. So it was at least okay, and 4 out of 10 or more of you have said that it went extremely well. This has been our experience in work teams, and even having a virtual training with a board last week. We're seeing that it's going a little bit better than what people might have expected. School district IT directors and so forth, technology folks have put together, often using Zoom, but different platforms, and help trustees connect and be able to focus on the content at hand rather than having to worry about the technology. And we're seeing it's generally working well. We'll have some time here in a few minutes to just talk about what didn't work well and some tips. Again, we've put a lot of resources out. The last few weeks, we've been sending a bi-weekly email to all the trustees in the state. At least half of the trustees have been opening and reading those, but some of the things that are in there relate very much to how to conduct a virtual meeting and the laws around that, but also just the practicality too. So this idea that board members retain their oversight. Now, here's one more curious question we've got in the poll. I know there was a resolution that was being passed around the state, a model resolution that was encouraging boards to relinquish a lot of their oversight authority to the superintendent during this crisis. And I'm very curious how many of you have passed a resolution like that or are considering a resolution like that. As this poll is up in front of you, you might think about that. Now, did our board pass a resolution that we're granting emergency authority to the superintendent that might include acting outside of regular board policy or even budget considerations? So have you perhaps waived the threshold that the superintendent needs to come to the board and for specific amounts, or have you not done that? It's just a yes or no. So 81% have passed a special resolution on that. As far as good governance goes, we just want to encourage all the boards in the state to be mindful of this, be careful with it. And the idea that, again, the law here in Texas allows for virtual meetings. An emergency meeting can be called with just a 1-hour notice. And so thinking about what are the kinds of decisions that a superintendent would need to make that he or she couldn't pull the board together within an hour to make that decision. If you're going to relinquish a lot of your authority, be mindful of what that is and whether or not it's necessary, what those thresholds should be. Just continuing on this theme of staying connected, you want to stay connected, not only the board and superintendent, but you want to stay connected with your community. And so how might you, as a board member, continue to stay connected with the community, but in an informed way? Some resources that are also available, obviously the TEA website, Governor Abbott's website, and press releases. If you want, if you're going to communicate with your community and share maybe with neighbors, here's what we're hearing, here's what we're thinking, here's what might happen, and you're just having those kind of conversations with neighbors, friends, family, the governor's website and again, their press conferences are a great resource for information that's kind of the latest. This is what's happening around here. But you might think also about how do you stay connected like this through these Monday webinars that MASBA is doing together with the Black Caucus and Leadership ISD. How might you stay connected with other trustees across the state, and particularly those that are in proximity to you? Because a lot of times, as we notice, when schools been closed for weather related or those types of things, it's often well advised for districts in the area to work together. I would think very similarly with online learning, special accommodations for students, meals, any special services. If your school district's thinking about, doing something that may be unique or special, why don't you check in with the districts that border your districts for the sake of your students and their families to have kind of a coordinated effort. You might even think of ways that you could share on meal distribution, for example, but we'll get into that maybe if there's some questions on it. This idea of letting the superintendent lead, remembering his or her role as management and operations, typically the superintendent and or communications director is the designated spokesperson for the district. You want to stay in contact with them, have emergency board meetings when you need to, but you may even consider kind of an ongoing. Maybe you need to meet more frequently during this crisis than what you typically would. And you're thinking, well, we don't want to take away time from the superintendent or his or her work with the district, but you do want to stay informed. So what are some mechanisms where you could have essentially a legal social hour in some time of day, some day of the week, where the board could have a conversation together with the superintendent? It would need to be open to the public, but you could be updated, you could be hearing on an ongoing basis what's happening. A lot of superintendents have the practice of Friday notes, where they send a summary on Fridays of the types of things they've done through the week. You might want to consider having that more often. Maybe it's a very short update daily or every other day, where the superintendent is keeping the board apprised of, this is the question we had, this is the issue that arose, this is our response to it. That makes it a whole lot easier to support decisions of the superintendent in their role when you know what the superintendent actually did. I mentioned this idea again of knowing what the message is. You want to keep the community connected and informed. You also want to, whenever possible, share positive messages. We've been trying to do this with TASB communication when we hear of excellent services or special things that have been happening in districts or with boards across the state. We're trying to include those examples in our communication to hear the positive message. I think, again, if ever there was a time where we needed to hear some positives, we need to hear it now. And that idea that we make ourselves ambassadors of hope, of gratitude, of compassion, not talking about stretching the truth or pretending that there aren't some bad things happening. We need to stay factual, but we also need to extend hope. And anytime we can give clear, calm, reassuring, factual messages, here's what we're doing, here's what we know is happening, here's the organizations in the community that we're working with, I think, it encourages all of us to know that different individuals and different groups are working in collaborative ways and not in divisive ways or even in competitive ways. So showing leadership when communicating about health practices, not just school stuff, but Keep in mind, again, schools are often the primary source of information about health and nutrition in a community. In many communities across Texas, the school district is the largest employer. They have the largest budget. They have by far the biggest impact on the individuals living within the community as one organization. And so being a central hub for best practices, how that relates to social distancing and suggestions that come out of credible resources, whether it's Johns Hopkins or the CDC or whoever it is that you as a group have deemed, okay, this is credible, relying upon your school nurses and that staff and special services, how can we help folks know more about just healthy practices? So again, as I wrap up my portion here, I think we want to focus on good governance is good governance. Jacinto started this off with references to my book about balanced governance. You don't want to over manage, you don't want to micromanage, in other words. Neither do you want to just be a rubber stamp board and completely disengaged, because what's the point of that? Again, we desperately need balanced governance in this time. We need a balance between the state and the local. We need a balance at the local level between the administrative role and the governance role. So asking informed questions, keeping yourself engaged and involved in the district will go a long ways toward not only serving the needs of your students, but also helping create a sense of calm and a sense of hope for your community. Thank you, Jacinto and Jamie. And let's see what questions there might be.
Thank you, Dr. Gore. So Jamie, if you would walk us through the questions that might be coming in from our friends that are joining us on the call today.
Happy to do so. We have a question, first of all, from Natasha Butler. The question for you, Dr. Gore, is, can you please tell us what the book's name is and how to find it?
Well, I'll let Cinto hold his up, or I'll reach for a copy here. Let's see. So this is, yeah, there we go. We've got two of them now. This is a book that Dr. Tom Alsbury and I co-edited for Harvard Education Press a few years back. And our intention was to create something that was sharing out the most relevant and most recent research on how school boards affect student achievement. And as you look through this book, it's designed to be kind of read like a book study. Maybe once a month, the board superintendent team would have a conversation about the content in the book. It's available on Amazon. It was published by Harvard Education Press, and I've got a box full beside me.
Tremendous. Thank you, Dr. Gore. We're going to come to a question from Winford Adams in just one moment. We're going to unmute them. In the meantime, while we're preparing to do that, we have a question from Trish Bode, and the question is, or her comment is, that the poll was not complete for her, she says. She writes, we gave superpower, the superintendent power, if he cannot meet with us, then he will let us know if he did, for some unforeseen reason, have to use those powers. Any comments on that, Dr. Gore?
That sounds like, again, to borrow the word balance, that sounds like a great way to enact a resolution like that. If for some reason, the internet's down, I mean, I really think there's probably some wisdom in what Trish is sharing from Leander ISD. If for some reason the superintendent cannot meet with a quorum of the board within a reasonable time, here's your powers and authority. I like that.
Tremendous. We have a comment from Winford Adams, who has some concerns about special resolutions. We've unmuted Winford. Winford, are you with us? Are you able to unmute on your side?
Can you hear me?
There we go. Go for it.
Yeah, it's really just a concern. Our resolution is really long with it seems to me like a dozen whereas statements, and then several therefore be it resolved statements that I felt when I first read it, felt like, why do you need a board if the superintendent can do all of this? And so I had that concern on my first reading of it, and I was wondering if anybody else felt that way.
Our attorneys at TASB have had similar concerns, Winford, the way that resolution got passed around and wherever it came from, it really seemed like the board just turning over all the keys and walking away and leaving it with the superintendent. I like what Trish had to say about wording that resolution in such a way that if for some reason the board cannot meet or the superintendent cannot meet with the board, the law allows in Texas for an emergency board meeting to be called within an hour. That can be conducted on a telephone. But I also recognize that, you know, we didn't know going into this, and I don't think we still know the full extent of this virus and how it's going to affect communities and disrupt services potentially. We have had some episodes where internet was slowed. I remember hearing on the news a few weeks ago that Netflix had voluntarily slowed down their streaming service because they were bogging down the internet. So I like the idea that, you know, if God forbid, but it could happen, a majority of the board was sick with the virus or their family was sick with the virus. In that kind of a context, you want the work of the district to move forward. But without some strong language in there that kind of limits it to this is only if the board could not meet, then it seems to make sense to me.
Tremendous. We're going to unmute Trustee Linda Griffin after the following question, so we'll have her ready. In the meantime, this question comes from Judith Cruz. Judith asks, Dr. Gore referenced TEA resources about boards and community engagement. Where can we find those? I'm happy to post the link there, Dr. Gore, if you might be able to direct us to where we can find the TEA resources about boards and community engagement that you reference.
You know, I don't know that it was community engagement necessarily for the board that I was thinking of, but I'm going to go to the TEA main website, and I think you'll find on there some resources that are just kind of the latest information, if you will. And so I was thinking of trustees being informed with, I mean, right on the front page of the website right now, there's the TEA office closings, teleworking, and then more about A through F accountability resource page there. If parents or community members have questions or concerns about the STAR testing, about articulating to the next grade, about graduation, obviously at TASB, we're getting that information and getting it out as quickly as possible. But when TEA has issued something new, they tend to post it right here on the front page. And so, you know, they've got coronavirus COVID-19 resources right there, top left. That's what I was thinking of, more that the board members be informed themselves so that they could share accurate information with the community.
Tremendous. Thank you, Dr. Gore. We've unmuted Trustee Linda Griffin, and after Trustee Griffin, we'll come to Dr. Laura DuPont. Trustee Griffin, are you unmuted?
Yes, I am. Thank you for the opportunity. When you talked about the emergency solution, as I think we saw at first coming from TEA, we didn't put the stipulation on as if the board cannot be assembled as a quorum. We listed a number of things that we were giving the superintendent authority to have, but we did put a time frame of the beginning and the end. And then we asked that different, aside from his regular weekly board highlights to us on Sunday evenings, any action he took concerning anything we gave him emergency authority for, he had to immediately send that report out to us so we could keep track of what was going on. And that was our oversight way. The reason we didn't put if we could not meet, it just seemed like everything was changing so fast for the Dallas County, for the state, and we just couldn't keep up. So the superintendent was already making those decisions and basically calling us, but we had specific items that we listed, and he's going to have to give us a separate report every time he makes emergency action.
That sounds like a great example of balance too, Linda.
Trustee Griffin, while we have you on the line, you would also ask the question in the question bar about the digital divide. Anything you'd like to say about that?
I just like to know how other districts are handling the digital divide. I mean, we're rolling out this e-learning. We can call it distance learning. We can call it whatever we want to call it. It's using technology. But our kids that are most affected by this, I was just wondering if anyone has found really a great solution, because we know in all of our communities there is a digital divide. We've been looking at it for a while, haven't gotten a solution, and it just seems like as we roll out other devices to assist, it's really not helping the most needy students, because we haven't rolled out the hotspots, and the providers are telling them they can get it for 60 days, but they're going to make them continue to have it after the 60 days. So I didn't know if anyone else had a solution.
Excellent question, Trustee Griffin. So we do have a few questions in the survey at the end of this time together, where we're going to be asking about the rolling out of hotspots and Wi-Fi availability and the internet availability. There's also one-to-one devices for students. So we'll look forward to gathering that data. In the meantime, Dr. Gore, any thoughts on anything that you've heard? I know here in Central Texas, the Lockhart ISD Board of Trustees recently approved the purchase of various towers for Wi-Fi availability, it seems. So we're hearing districts doing some creative things.
Yeah, I think everyone will benefit from what you get back in the survey on that. I would love to hear more about the mobile hotspots in Austin and how those are working.
I'm not sure I have a lot of information. I know that we're rolling out buses with hotspots on them into neighborhoods right now. And so this evening is our next meeting here in the Austin ISD, so hopefully I'll have more to report after that.
Yeah, that might be something great for the group to learn more about. I saw the report on that was there's a partnership with a company that donated the equipment. It sounded like sort of a superpower, if you will, a high-powered mobile hotspots going into apartment complexes and so forth. Kind of exciting.
There we go. We're unmuting Dr. Laura DuPont, who's with us with a question as well. Dr. DuPont.
Oh, actually, I think I'm sorry. I somehow hit my hand up and didn't intend for it to be up. Although I will we've had some issues in the district, Clear Creek ISD, about when we released a new a modified grading policy, and a lot of it's coming about by actually people not understanding even grading and GPAs and the impact on college admissions and all of that tied together. And so, Phil, I think it's important what you said about I think it's a great opportunity to communicate to the community too about all of those things. So not just change a policy, but then do some education behind the implications of it, and so that even trustees understand all of the issues involved.
That's great. One of the things that we're seeing as we all go through this crisis together, we're experiencing some social and emotional challenges. All of us are, and it's like a grief cycle, if you will. As I see things posted either on Nextdoor or other social media, I find that parents, as well as just general community members, they're angry. They're angry about this virus. They're angry about the uncertainty. They're angry that they've been told one thing and then they're told something else. And they go through that process. And we know that the grief cycle kind of culminates in acceptance of a new reality. But actually, we go through the process multiple times. So very similar to a loss. We've all lost normalcy. And I think to your point, Dr. DuPont, many of our community members didn't even know what normal was. I mean, they thought they knew, but until it affected them or their child or the child of someone they know closely, they don't know about grading policies. They don't know about the implications of the state test, that kind of thing. So I think you're spot on that this is a great opportunity to educate the greater community, and at the same time recognizing that people are experiencing a lot of different emotions, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anger, and just be aware that it's not personal. If they lash out at you because you're explaining something to them or they don't understand something in the school district, it's not personal. It's really where they're coming from right now.
Appreciate that, Dr. Gore. We have 2 more questions in the queue. We invite our listeners also to raise their hand or to type their questions in the question box. We'll unmute Lee Crawshaw in just a moment. Before that, we have a question from Trustee JD Rodriguez from the Dilley ISD. He begins with his comments. He says, "It seems like Texas districts are going in different directions in regard to student grades. Do you think it's fair that certain districts are recording grades and attendance and others are not? Shouldn't all the Texas districts be on the same page in regards to recording grades? What I have read, TEA is saying grading is a local issue." Any response, Dr. Gore?
Yeah, it's funny how this gets pushed. I wrote what I think was an excellent article that got published about 3 weeks ago in the Texas Lone Star. So it was written 6 or 7 weeks ago. And it was all about things very near and dear to my heart, of the importance of more local control, more local governance, a balance between centralized and localized governance. And this issue has really pushed me on that. In fact, when I saw the magazine come out, I thought, doggone it, boy, did I ever write about the wrong thing this month. Because nobody's asking questions about how do we have more local control. In fact, many of us are thinking about how do we have more centralized control? How do we have more centralized practices around shelter in place? I mean, it doesn't do any good for one county or one jurisdiction to issue shelter in place and social distance, and then across the line, people are still mixing and mingling and sharing, and lots of varied opinions about what the right thing should be. But I think this is another prime example where generally, as a local elected trustee, we would be advocates for local control, local decision making. I know the State Board of Education in Texas is sick of hearing me talk about local flexibility and more local control. I know they're sick of me hearing me about that because they've told me so. But so I guess, JD, it is a great question. You know, is grading something that should be a statewide system? And in most normal circumstances, we would say emphatically no. But then when something like this comes that's unexpected, we're thinking, gee, wouldn't it be great if we were all doing the same thing? So it's a deeper philosophical question, and I won't wax on further, but it really does push, what do we value? And do we want the state to tell us what to do because then we get consistency, or do we want to have independent school districts?
Thank you for that, Dr. Gore. We're going to see if we can unmute Leigh Crawshaw of the West ISD Board of Trustees. We sent her an audio pin, #56#, to enable her to unmute. We're going to pause and see if she's able to unmute there. In the meantime, we want to encourage those who have questions to raise your hand or to respond in the question box. We're not hearing Trustee Crawshaw yet. That brings us to the end of the questions that are in the queue. We're going to welcome back our president, our MASBA president, Jacinto Ramos Jr. here.
Thank you, Jamie. Dr. Gore, I appreciate you and your wealth of knowledge and helping us by jumping on this call today. I wanted to make a special mention to all of our essential workers, employees, friends, family that are out on the front lines. I know that Dallas ISD's folks that handle food were on the cover of a big national magazine here recently. I do also want to note the collaborative nature that's come about of this situation of board members coming together that I've gotten to experience and sharing of ideas, not losing focus of what the main thing is here, and being mindful that young people and families are going through some challenges. And just wanted to give that special shout out to all of the essential workers out on the front lines throughout the state of Texas and throughout our country. So anything that you'd like to add on any of those other notes, Dr. Gore, and some closing statements from your end?
You know, if there are not any more questions, I think that is great, acknowledging there are many heroes out there on the front line right now, and many of them are educators. Many trustees across the state of Texas are nurses, firefighters, and peace officers in various roles. And so we certainly, our thoughts and prayers are with them, as they are with all of our colleagues across the state. I know, here at TASB, we're doing our best to make every possible resource available and to use some new technologies to engage trustees in conversations. We're going to be doing a series of virtual spring workshops, and you'll see some information out on that. The Leadership TASB current class, who's been greatly disrupted. In fact, they were supposed to have had a session this weekend in El Paso. That won't happen. But a lot of those folks have really stepped up and said, what can we do to help? How can we share information? To JD's point, questions about grading. I think we've got a lot of questions around the state about graduation, what to do with graduation. Many of you have been contemplating and maybe even made some decisions about class rank and those kinds of things. All to know we're all in this together, and we want to help and serve each other in any way that we can. So thank you for letting me be a part of this.
We still have 18 minutes and we have 4 more questions that have come in. If President Ramos, if it's okay, we'll go through a few more questions here.
Please do.
We do have Trustee Crawshaw of the West ISD did submit her question in writing. We appreciate that, Trustee Crawshaw. I'll read it out to you. She says, I wanted to point out that the communication or technology divide is also a location problem. Not all students live in an area that a bus can be pulled up to allow access because they are at the end of a dirt road or other such distant areas. It sounds more like a comment, but any reflection on that, Dr. Gore?
It's a real problem. I'm aware of that, and I think that as you continue to have these conversations and some best practices emerge for best ways to serve those students, I've seen where school buses are going around in rural areas and passing out packets of paper, information like that, still running their route. Some buses have run their routes and passed out meals as well. So there are ways to do this, but we do have to get creative, work together, and not allow ourselves to get stuck. And stuck, I mean, thinking, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. Okay, we can talk all day about the things we can't do, but what can we do? And that's where leadership comes in at the board level as well as with the administrators.
And Trustee Crawshaw is pointing out in a subsequent comment that the problem of, there are also other technology challenges that we're facing as districts, including the fact that multiple students are using one piece of technology, or when parents are needing to use that technology for work at the same time as students needing it to do their studies. So simply pointing out other challenges that we're certainly seeing in our districts.
Yeah, it's very true.
We're seeing a question. Before I go to this next question, I just want to ask Trustee Bill Lacey. I apologize, I accidentally deleted your question. If you don't mind retyping it in, I will be happy to ask it in a moment. The next question comes from Trustee Donnie Hernandez from the Houston ISD Board of Trustees. She asks, what are your thoughts about adding employees to emergency priorities?
I'm trying to think of the context, and I'm sure that she has a very specific context that question refers to, but I may need someone else to either clarify the question or perhaps respond to the question.
Excellent question. I'll unmute Trustee Hernandez in the event that she's able to unmute and to add to the conversation there. Are you there, Trustee Hernandez?
Hello?
Go for it.
Hi.
Hi. So yes, HISD is creating a set of emergency priorities, kind of along those same lines as constraints. And so one of the discussions that's going on is adding employees to these emergency priorities, or just leaving the emergency priorities to be focused on students.
So if I understand your question, I do think there are a lot of emergency needs of our staff. So I'm not sure what the power or the authority that the board would be giving to the superintendent in that regard might be. How, I think there's got to be some balance in that, but recognizing that many of our employees are in crisis mode personally, and how they are getting assistance, getting their needs met, should be one of our concerns.
Our next question comes from Trustee Ty G. Jones of the Lancaster ISD. He asks, will TASB be submitting updates or recommendations regarding policy CKC local and legal on emergency operations plans?
I don't have those policies in front of me, and I think I might be remiss to say too much about that, but I can certainly forward that as a suggestion request. If in fact our policy services isn't already looking at those, I would assume they're already looking and considering some things there, but I really don't know.
Tremendous. We have one more question in the queue. We'll just pause and allow people to raise their hand or to send in any other questions. Otherwise, the last question in the queue comes to us from Kay Douglas of TASB. How do you recommend that boards whose members have previously been divided use this time to heal rifts and work more cohesively?
Geez, that's a great question, Kay. Obviously, crises, challenges are a time for us to be able to come together around common goals. And so I think our hope would be that, in the midst of a country that's divided politically, that school boards could be an example of high functionality, of conflict resolution. And I think, here's a time to, if we've ever had a time to set aside petty differences and to figure out how to work together, this is a critical time. I did catch Kay on the last webinar had mentioned something about using this as an opportunity for ongoing team building. We know that, the law requires boards to have team building once a year, but building a team isn't a once a year endeavor. It's something that should be right top of mind. How do we keep the team together? How do we work well together as a team? Whether the board and superintendent are doing that on their own or with some outside help. Certainly this is a time again for folks to say, we need to come together on this and let's talk through our differences. Let's set aside our differences and do what's best for kids.
Appreciate Dr. Gore. We seem to have a question. I'm unmuting our trustee Armando Rodriguez of the Canutillo ISD, whom I believe may have a question or comment as well. Trustee Rodriguez.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks again for this discussion, Mazba. I think it's great for our board members across the state to have this type of dialogue. Going off Kay, she actually beat me a little bit to the punch. One is an opportunity for team building, but I see it as an opportunity for inequities. And within our board, we do have a split board where we're trying to address one-to-one digital device at our last board meeting. And it's just the continued conversation has been within the minority of the board is how do we question the superintendent and, not bring it together. So I'm just trying to figure out what are, I guess, ways that we could approach those type of situations when discussing that with our colleagues that don't want to either address the team as a whole moving forward in this time or address some of the inequities that we're starting to see within our community because of the current situation.
Yeah, a lot of times at the bottom of conflict are value differences that folks have. And we all suffer from the predicament of we know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. And many times we don't know that there's something out there that we don't know. So any opportunity for virtual coffee, we always encourage, when there's a conflict or misunderstanding or difference of opinion, however you want to frame it, that people try to address that one-on-one as much as possible. And again, fully within Open Meetings Act, to have a conversation with a colleague that we disagree with, but extending the grace to say, tell me your side of this story. I really just don't understand. And I think coming open-ended, trying to control our own emotions so that we're not angry or judgmental or accusatory, but help me hear where you're coming from. I really don't think that would be a good idea, or this would be a good idea, but I want to hear what you have to say. I do think that when we come with an open heart and open minds, that we're more likely to have a positive experience with another person. This has been alluded to a couple of times on this call, but boards and groups of people, sometimes families, obviously, we have long-term underlying conflict that is at best an irritation, but then when there's a real difficult thing to be done, sometimes it can turn into a very ugly conflict. How do we stay out of the newspapers? How do we stay out of the realm of drama and create space for folks to share their perspectives, their opinions that may be different than ours? I think a lot of that starts with listening.
Tremendous. Dr. Gore, we have two final ones. We have a hard stop at 1:00 p.m., but we have first a question from Trustee Natasha Butler of Alief ISD, and after that we'll unmute Trustee Al Velarde of the El Paso ISD. Trustee Butler asks, in regarding changing the grading policy, does a school board need to change the policy, or is it something that the superintendent can do through his administrative responsibilities?
I believe typically that would come to the school board to change policy, and I'm not sure if you're using policy with a capital P, school board policy, or a lower P, which is just, this is the way we do things around here. But it would be my expectation that that would come to the board.
Tremendous. And in the last moments that we have left before we hand it back to President Ramos, we have a question from Trustee Al Velarde of the El Paso ISD, whom I've unmuted. Welcome, Trustee Velarde.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for putting on this seminar. Here in El Paso, Region 19, I've been approached by a group of board members from various districts, and I kind of like the idea. That is about pulling together kind of a local association of school board members to be able to discuss amongst each other different issues that may be taking place, to really work with each other, various districts at this board level, this board communication level. And I like the idea. I do have, though, some concerns. Obviously, if you pull more than 3 board members from one district, are we creating some kind of quorum issue? How do we select people? Is it, and what's TASB's thoughts maybe about some obstacles we need to be concerned about? And what are some good things that maybe we ought to be looking at, or if you're aware of other associations like this that exist anywhere else out in the state? And I'll leave it to you, Mr. Gore.
Well, sure. There is a West Texas School Boards Association, and Armando, the last person to ask a question, could tell you more information about that. Excuse me. Or if you were to send me an email, I could find all the details and get you in touch with folks. I think that's a great idea. As far as meeting with a quorum of the board or more, it's no different than when you go somewhere for training or something like that. You're announcing that the board is going to be attending a meeting, or a quorum of the board will be attending a meeting, and you're not conducting business of the district, or even discussing just your district's business. You're talking about the business of the region or the educational needs of students in your region. And so most of the areas of the state have regional school boards associations, and there is one there in West Texas.
Tremendous. Appreciate that, Dr. Gore. We're going to welcome back President Ramos to wrap up with the 5 minutes that we have remaining. President Ramos.
Thank you, Dr. Matthias. You know, in the coming weeks, we are working in partnership with Holly Maria Flynn Villaseca from Houston ISD, who's one of our board members of MASBA. Also, as like we mentioned, partnering with Ty Jones and the Black Caucus. We want to be able to bring more content that you are asking for. Don't forget, we're going to ask a couple of questions at the end of this call. We want to capture that information and be able to get that out to all of you as well, so that we can share the information. Just to get an idea, we're thinking about trying to get in touch with Dr. Carrie Simpson, a researcher, a lot of revolving around governance as well. We're going to tap into the NSBA, the National School Board. We'll hopefully be talking to Virginia Jacobs, the Chief of Equity at that level. And then Ty Jones, like to just bring you back on for a quick sec. Get your thoughts from your leadership role currently as to things that we could continue to talk about here. Particularly, it's the disproportionate, the disproportionality revolving around COVID-19 affecting the Black community. So if you're there, I'd love to get your insights as we get ready to sign off in a bit.
All right, thanks a lot, Cinto. Everybody hear me fine?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, just want to thank you for getting this going and the opportunity to partner Leadership ISD and MASBA on behalf of the Texas Caucus of Black School Board members. I think this is a great opportunity for us to begin to dialogue about these issues. I wanted to mention it as it relates to our health concerns and more African Americans are being more disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. I think one that goes back to a session I presented down at Governance Camp, which talks about those biases. And there was a video from University of Texas, which specifically spoke about health concerns and how sometimes the doctors don't prescribe the appropriate medication for people of color. And those biases may impact, or may be a possible impact of what's going on now. So I will begin doing some research to make sure I'm able to provide some solid information and or a health professional who can kind of speak to that point, what's beginning to address these concerns that are impacting our communities. Phil Gore also mentioned about Leadership TASB. We did have some things planned for this upcoming week, which has been postponed or possibly canceled. I guess cancel would be the word. I'll serve as the vice chair. They will be doing some webinars coming up, the class of 2020. So I'll get the information and get that shared so individuals can listen in and have some additional comments and dialogue to connect and learn some different ways that they've been researching over the course of the year. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity again. I look forward to us visiting again next week.
Thank you, Ty. I appreciate you and your leadership. Appreciate the Black Caucus jumping in to support the work that we all no doubt want to get done. My friends, thank you for tuning in today. Thank you, Dr. Phil Gore. Appreciate you once again. Jamie Matthias over there killing it with MASBA. All my friends out there, please stay safe. We look forward to seeing you all in person sooner rather than later. Everybody have a good one. Take care.